Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I am here with the wonderful Andrew Krivak. We are going to be unpacking this delightful, probing, searching, beautiful literary book, Mule Boy, which just came out. A few words before we get started. We are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, as always, and The Thoughtful Bro is here to talk about what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. We are broadcasting on a mighty blaze, an all-volunteer initiative connecting writers and readers virtually since COVID. And actually, we've been doing it for 6 whole years. Today, if you don't know, is a Mighty Blaze's 6th birthday. Since our founding in the pandemic, I must throw some numbers at you. We have gathered over 18,000 followers. We've done over 1,400 author interviews. We've published over 300 editions of our newsletter. We have given over 2,000 days of primo top shelf literary community to you, our viewers. So happy birthday to A Mighty Blaze, and a big shout out to Caroline Levitt and Jenna Blum, our 2 founders. As always on A Mighty Blaze, we're not asking for money. If you want to show us the love, you can just post about us on social media or repost us or tell your book loving friends about us. But if you are in the mood to spend some money, dear friends, spend it on elegaic, elemental, poetic, deeply felt works of literary fiction, books like Mule Boy by Andrew Krivak. We are going to put a link to buy that through bookshop.org in our chat. Please go ahead and buy a couple copies for yourself, for your friends. It's just a wonderful, kind of challenging, beautiful work that I read in one sitting, and I'm going to get into that more in a second. But first, about Andrew. He is the author of 5 novels, 2 chapbooks of poetry, and 2 works of nonfiction. His 2011 debut novel, The Sojourn, was a National Book Award finalist. His other novels include The Signal Flame, Like the Appearance of Horses, and The Bear, which received the Banff Mountain Book Prize for Fiction and the Massachusetts Book Award. He's also the author of the spiritual memoir, A Long Retreat in Search of a Religious Life. He holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University, an MA in philosophy from Fordham, a PhD in literary modernism from Rutgers, and he is currently a visiting lecturer in English at Harvard. I feel like that's like hitting for the cycle in literature. His 5th novel, Mule Boy, it came out just a few weeks ago. It's the story of a 13-year-old Slovakian boy who survives a Pennsylvania coal mining collapse, and he tries to make sense of his life in the aftermath. The Wall Street Journal says this novel is a stunner, and Publishers Weekly writes, Krivak brilliantly succeeds at plumbing the depths of the human spirit. This novel is flawless. We are so happy and honored to have him here on the 6th birthday of A Mighty Blaze. Andrew, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you, Mark. Happy birthday.
Thank you. On behalf of all A Mighty Blaze, I say thank you, sir. All right. So I want to set the stage a little bit. I'm a basketball coach. My youngest son, he's in 6th grade. And we were in the playoffs over the weekend. And we had high hopes, but we lost on Saturday. We were eliminated. A cruel end, as they are all cruel when you get knocked out of the playoffs at the end of the season. And I came home and I was all depressed. And I just sat on the couch and I opened this book. And it just washed over me. I didn't really move for like the next 3 hours, and I just read the whole thing. It was like gentle rain kind of falling on me. There were these kind of like good, old, simple words. And there's this feeling that one of the great things literature can do is I have this feeling like a coal mining collapse and a 6th grade basketball loss are a little bit different in stature. And yet I felt like here's an author who is like chewing over all the hard, old, eternal questions of life in this beautiful, simple language. And it's just sort of what I needed right at that moment. So I would have loved it anyway, but it kind of hit me just right at that moment. So thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome. Chewing over the hard, simple truths, you said, truths of life. Yeah, I like that.
You think that's fair? You think that's what you're up to?
Definitely fair. Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Look, the only reason I'm a writer is because I listened to stories from my grandmother for most of my life, both grandmothers, but my mother's mother predominantly. Mm-hmm. And as I think about that now, when you just said that, I realized that in every single telling, she was chewing over the hard, simple truths of life. Mm-hmm. Her life was really hard. Yeah. And simple in so many ways too. And now I think about it, I think you really hit it.
There's this great line in Shakespeare. I don't know what play it's from, but it's something like, can't we all just sit around and hear old sad stories of kings? It's
Oh,
something like that. It was that kind of moment, you
yeah.
know. So, but enough about my son's sixth grade basketball season. Why don't you tell us, for those who might not know, just give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of what Mule Boy is about.
Right. So, as you say, Mule Boy is a story of a 13-year-old mule boy in the mines in 1929. So it's right at the edge of when the mines essentially began to modernize, for lack of a better word. But the mules had been used in the mines, and they're still used in the mines into the 30s or so, the 1930s. And it's the story of this young boy who's caught in a mine collapse with four other miners, two miners and their two buddies. He goes down that day for the first day as a mule boy. And what ensues is that essentially he then listens to the stories of these men who are trapped in this room, this 10 by 10 room, for the hours and days in which they're trapped. So what I wanted to do, let me say this: my father's father died in a collapse like this when my father was 3 years old. My aunt, who's still alive, 96 years old, she was 6 months in my grandmother's belly when my grandmother was widowed. So I heard my whole life about, Grandpa Krivak, and it was robbing the pillars was the way in which he died. So mine rooms or breasts in a mine will be held up with the actual coal as pillars while they dig out the seams, and then when a seam is extracted, the miners will retreat, and as they go out, they take these pillars of coal because it's coal and it's worth a lot of money. And you do it right, and the room will just fold down, and you go with your coal. If something happens, then it goes badly. So he was killed in a collapse like that. He was not trapped in there. He came up out of the mines, and my grandmother went up to see him in the doctor's office at the breaker. And I think these doctors they must have seen this all the time. It was 1927, and they said, "Anna, he'll be fine. We don't know that he'll keep mining, but he's gonna be fine." And he grabs her and he pulls her close, and he says, "No, Anna, tonight I'll be with God." And he died. And it was my grandmother, my aunt, who told me that story, because her mother told her the story of her father's whole life so that she would know him. She said, "I never met my father, but I knew him my entire life." So that's the only historical truth that surrounds or is embedded in Mule Boy, if you will.
And I've heard you say that the only reason why you are a writer is because of these stories that you heard in your family.
Exactly. I mean, I think that would go back to the Sojourn, in fact, which is essentially the story of Austria-Hungary during the war, and my mother's father fought for the Austrian Landwehr against the Italians on the Piave River. But all of the men about whom I heard, my great uncle Joe, my grandfather, all these young men who lived in the old country and came to America. I am the grandson of immigrants. That's a fact. I created this kind of amalgam. I sort of boiled them all down into this one character of Joseph Vinich. So yes, beginning with my debut novel, those stories just keep coming out of me. And but this was one I've wanted to write for some time. I'm going to say, about 30 years I've been kicking it around. So
that really begs the question. I'm always interested in this kind of thing when somebody's been kicking around a story for a while. Why now? Like, what happened to you creatively? What was going on in your life? You said, I'm finally ready.
Great question. I think that I was ready to approach it the way that I formally have written it. So let me back up a bit. So with the Sojourn came the Signal Flame and Like the Appearance of Horses. And those novels cohere around a trilogy of the place, a fictional town of Darden, Pennsylvania, where I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And it's essentially a sweep of the grandfathers, the fathers, and brothers who are essentially generations of men at war. The idea for the coal mining novel, it's not so much to write about coal mining. It's this question of what was it like in those last days, hours, minutes when a person dies underground like that? What do you think of? What is that memento mori, as the Stoics would say? How do you approach your death? And I think a couple things happened. I turned 60, and I had 4 novels under my belt, and I thought, okay, so this could not be just a standard, third person point of view novel about the coal mines. I really wondered about this. How can I take that idea of storytelling, the oral tradition of storytelling that I heard from my grandmothers, and put it on the page? And so a couple of years ago, I was really experimenting with what it would look like to write not a sentence, but a series of clauses just connected or separated by commas. The idea would be that every clause an idea, every comma a breath. It was also, practically really easy to write that way. I shouldn't say easy to write. It's easy to just forget about the nonsense and just let your mind tell the story to the page, which again, back to the idea of the oral storytelling. And so I started it, and I do want to give a nod to Michael Ondaatje's novel, The Cat's Table, because I started out in the third person. This boy, 13 years old, walking down to the frame of the elevator to go down into the mines that day, and he begins The Cat's Table in the third person as this ship from Colombo, Sri Lanka, is boarded up with folks going to London, and this young boy is on the boat. And then the next chapter, he changes to the first person. So I love how Ondaatje is always thinking about the way in which, who is the storyteller? And I think that's a question that is always fascinating to me. Who is the storyteller, and why are you telling it? So it quickly turned from this young boy of 13 walking down through the morning as the morning grays and the dawn comes up. I don't know if you've ever seen these patch towns in the Pennsylvania coal mining areas. I grew up driving past them. And it's all about the gray. It's just slag heaps and calm banks, and you can see breakers. I grew up in the 70s in Pennsylvania, and it was all about the coal industry. So I realized that I did not want to have the novel get bogged down. So I jumped to the first person and used old Aristotle, his idea that tragedy happens in 24 hours. So I'll tell our listeners out there that this book actually is written in the 24-hour period in which the main character is an old man living in a house on a lake in New Hampshire, far, far from the mines, but in the shadow of the mountain. So this idea of the shadow of the mountain, it's almost like a reverse. In Pennsylvania, you go down to the mountain. Where he is, and he finds himself as an old man, is the mountain is will never be mined. Essentially, it's risen to its peak. And so he tells the story about about the collapse, his coming of age, and that those moments in which the men tell themselves to him the stories of their lives before their deaths, and he's waiting that whole day until the evening when the one person he wants to come and visit him does, because all throughout his whole life in this place in New Hampshire, people have come to him, the daughters, the mothers, the wives, the daughters, the sons, the grandsons, simply to ask what happened, what did you do, and what did you fail to do?
I have a friend who said to me recently that the thing about living through trauma is that those who live through trauma gain a kind of special knowledge. And the question of their lives is, will they be able to use that special knowledge to share it and to help other people? And I was thinking about that as I was reading this book.
Yeah. I mean, I've not suffered great trauma.
Yeah.
I can't pretend I have. But the elders in my family did. And so I think I just try to connect with them in that way. Just try to, not exactly channel them, but think really, this idea of empathy. It's when you really think about what that word means, it's kind of like to be with the sadness.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I do as a writer. That's my great meditation. My prayer really as a writer is to connect to them in that way.
I love that. Another thought I had about this book is I've been thinking recently, I've read a number of books recently that are about an older person thinking back on their life. And it's not like this is some breakthrough thing. In fact, what I'm going to say is that, like, I think this is like one of the framings, one of the ways of telling a story that I think the novel is best equipped for. This kind of way that an older person is like making sense. How did I get here? And why did my life turn out this way? What does it all mean? Can I make peace with it? So I'm just curious what you think about that too, just kind of as the novel being sort of like uniquely equipped as like a device for a person looking back on their life, and kind of the novel being like a meaning making machine.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, and I think you're spot on. If I think about the folks I've admired as novelists, Ondaatje, the Cat's Table is about that, and I think his questions about who is the storyteller and why is important. I will say too that I feel like in some ways that's since the Sojourn, I feel like a one-trick pony. It's not exactly what I've done, but it's this idea of thinking back and telling a story. I will say after the Sojourn, I could not write in the first person for 3 novels. There was a chapter in like The Appearance of Horses that's in the first person, but I just couldn't do it. And so Mule Boy is also a move back to that kind of being with the elders and thinking about life. What does this mean? Not just what does it mean with respect to, how did this all shake out? But at the level of the existential, at the level of what is meaning and why, and not why am I here, that sort of thing, but what is it? What have we made of this? And you think about the word poetess, it just means the maker. The old poets were just the great makers. And what were they makers of? Stories. And I want to believe that the poets, the tragedians, they, again, my buddy Aristotle would say, they are there watching the stage because they understand. There's that idea of catharsis when they see the tragedy. They're like, and I think that's really an element of it. That's kind of a cohesive, it's painful, right? But it's also this cohesion. I always imagine like a community of readers, a community of stage goers, theater goers, I should say. So yes, to me, I think is what it's all about.
Yeah. And, there's something I want to move on and talk a little bit about the writing style of the book, which is just so interesting and just really wonderful. And there's just something, a great word for it, I think, is elemental. There's something, I loved The Bear as well. That's when I actually the first book of yours that I read. And there's something similar going on there. There's just like these it's not just that you're talking about elemental things like love, death, war, very like chewing on the old kind of unsolvable problems of life, as I was saying earlier. But there's a way that like I just feel like your work, could be written in stone. It's like it could be like on a tablet that is like excavated from the earth, and you're just reading it, and there's like, because there's just these very basic kind of Anglo-Saxon words, and you're putting them together, and as they gain this kind of elemental force, because you're talking about simple things in a simple way. It's a kind of pure language. And so I wanted to just give people a taste of that. I know there's a passage that you read. So just take a moment, and why don't you just like set up what that passage is? And we don't usually do readings on the show. People who listen to this show know that. But I think that the language is so much at the center of what this project is that I wanted to make sure people heard it.
Okay, maybe you mentioned The Bear. I'll set it up I just wanted to go back and mention The Bear for a second.
Yeah.
The reason for the spare language and the simplicity of it in The Bear is because these are the last 2 people on Earth. It's not science fiction.
Yeah.
If people who've read it, they'll understand. But I was thinking about authorial authenticity. There could be nothing fluffy about that. Imagine what it's like for every single day. All you're consumed with is, how am I going to eat? And how will I stay warm? How will I stay alive? So that kind of doing only what you need to do, it really taught me a lot about language. What is going to be the best word for this? What is going to be the best way in which, not that I can convey a feeling, but I can convey the way in which the girl understands she's got to eat, right? So that has now shaped me as a writer, thinking about that level. And it definitely shaped me in Mule Boy. And I think that you don't have to be writing a book about the last two people on Earth in nature to understand that this kind of spare language is a powerful language, because I've increasingly tried to put aside all adornment in writing. I don't use italics anymore. I don't use quotation marks, and now I don't even use periods. So just
why is that?
Well, so in this book, I didn't, because to me, it wasn't about the sentence. I think it was just about the breath. And at one point, I think I put a period at the last end of the book, and I thought, no, it's not what it is. It's not about the sentence. There is no end stop. People don't stop telling stories, and I've never spoken a period. I don't know what that's like. Yeah. So
I was just going to say quickly, there was I had Daniel Krauss on the show, when his latest book came out. It's called Angel Down. And this is a book about trench warfare in World War I. And he experimented with a few different ways of telling that story. And he eventually arrived on no periods either. So it's the same thing, but for him, it's serving a totally different purpose. Right. The purpose it's serving is there's like toxic gas and bombs and guns and mud and rats. And it's like, it is an unrelenting assault on the senses. I mean, your book is doing something totally different, but I think it's interesting that technically that same device is being used.
Yes. I mean, but I think what we're both getting at is that the question, what is the language capable of? And the language is capable of a great deal if you just, think outside that standard prosaic box. So anyway, so in this passage, the main character, an old man, is describing that first day when they go down. It's January 1st, and he has been down in the mines before. He has been in the mines as a nipper who opens and closes the door, as a spragger who shoves this stick into the wheels of the coal cars to stop them. And now it's his first job as Mule Boy. And he knows the men, the two miners and the two buddies. So he knows the yard, he knows the patch, the colliery, and they're just good men. The miners that my grandfathers worked with, they were a close-knit group of men who really knew their work, and they were proud of what they did. So this is just about the descent of the cable car into the mines. And I tried to capture this idea of the wind, a kind of unrelenting and constant dropping. So.
And you were saying in the green room about Greek tragedy and that catabasis, right?
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. You queued me up for this.
I loved it.
Yeah. In classical literature, the descent to the underworld is called the catabasis, and the hero will always go to find direction. So Odysseus goes to the edge of the world, to the river Ocean, and talks to Tiresias to find out how he can get home. And he sees all of the people of the underworld. He sees Achilles, he sees Agamemnon, and in Aeneas as well. In the Aeneid, he goes to the underworld and he sees his father to find out what his life will be once he becomes this great warrior. And it's the founding of the Italians. So the idea of the descent to the underworld is pretty classic. Even in Christianity, actually, now that you got me thinking about this, Christ is said on Holy Saturday to have descended into hell and taken out of hell all of the holy, the pre-Christian saints like Moses and John the Baptist and Adam. So it's a powerful classical motif.
There's Dante as well.
And oh my gosh, Dante, yeah, my the Purgatorio was really one of my favorite poems or piece of literature. But this does not rise to any of those occasions. But all of those texts were just, swirling in my brain while I sat down and thought, okay, so this elevator drops. What's it like? It is the wind of the mines, and we'll return to the mines, and it pushes against the bottom of the cage for a moment and circles around as the cable catches to control our descent, and the wind begins to whisper in from the top as the cage drops, and the whispers become like howls from the sides and the top. The entire descent, a chorus of howling wind and cable and cage as we drop. All of us silent there amid the howling, lights of the shaft blinking as we pass, lights of the new electrical lines, and lights from men's hats as they shine for a moment from the dark of the gangways we pass. The speed steady, the distance lengthening until it all becomes too constant, too ordinary, too far, and the cage keeps dropping and dropping. And I used to wonder each time without fail just how far down into the earth the cage and its cable could drop, how far down into the earth the work of mining could go, until I was certain that every man who ever made the descent with cables and coal cars and mules wondered in his heart, regardless of where he stood with God when he saw the priest in the confessional, if this was hell into which he was descending.
Wow. So some words that are used when people review this book are incantatory, rhythmic, muscular, even masculine. And, you feel all of that there. And that's sort of what I was talking about at the top of the show, just this way that the book just sort of washes over you. Sometimes without the punctuation, it can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes to feel like, okay, wait, who's talking? And like, what exactly is happening in the story? But I think that like, it's so worth it because the word I used when I was telling somebody about this book was surrender. I just let it wash over me. And if I like lost attention for a moment, the language just brought me back in. It's just hypnotic is what it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, I go back to my grandmother for a minute. There were times when I would get totally lost in her telling. Sometimes it was in Slovak, and sometimes my mom would translate, and other times, and I never ever wanted to stop her and say, "Hang on a second, who's that person?" Because I just trusted that she was going to bring it back around, and she always did. So I don't know. I appreciate you telling that. It's
So I think that Oh, sorry, did I cut you off there?
No. I'm just
So some people that you get compared to, and these are august names, but I think it bears scrutiny. Hemingway, Faulkner, McCarthy, these are names that come up. I absolutely found that all of those. I found that one of the main reasons is that I think in all of those writers, they're all stylists, and there is a way that the surface of the language and the sound of the language is creating some of the meaning versus, only leaving the meaning to be created by the meaning of the words. So a large part of the emotion that I took from this work came from that feeling of the language rolling through me, and even the way the language appeared on the page. I guess my question to you is, how do you feel about those comps? And of course, you're probably going to be self-deprecating about being compared to those folks, but I think the comparison is apt. And my question at the bottom of all of this is, if not them, then who? And kind of like, who was the one who taught you, maybe beyond your own family, who told you these stories originally? Who's the one who taught you to write this way and taught you kind of like the possibility of this direction with language?
Yeah, that's no one's asked me that. I like that question a lot, because I'll say, with respect to the comps, I read those guys and I devoured those guys. I mean, I could not read that. And I think it was essentially my trying to find a way, a sort of literary roadmap in my own growing up in northeastern Pennsylvania, which was not easy for me. I love to read, and I did well in school, and that came with a certain amount of animosity and some bullying. But look, I didn't really care. I could fight my way out of anything, and I often did. I didn't win them all. I won very few, but when I did, I was like, all right, now I'm doing this. And I think my dad too is really a great guy. He was an older father, because I'm about 15 years between my oldest brother and myself. So my younger brother and I are two of the youngest in the family. And he fought in World War II, and then he came home and went to school in the GI Bill. And he worked in the Navy Department as a civilian on the Gemini Project, and had a great job in Washington. And he and my mom had my three oldest, two brothers and sister. And then he got tuberculosis. So for 5 years, he was in Bethesda Naval, and the family, my mother had to go north to Pennsylvania to have her mom and dad help out. And then INH was the drug that saved all these folks who had TB. And he came home, and my brothers tell it. They said, my oldest brother said, I look at this guy and I'm thinking, he says, I'm your father. And he's like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. And so they started Family Part 2. But I'm telling you this because in that part of the world, books were my way of traveling, and I
Mm.
devoured everything I could. So there are other folks too, but I think I'm not a big Hemingway lover. I have such great respect for him. I think I'm just an old man in the sea guy because
Yeah,
that
for
is
sure.
such the compact journey narrative. But when I read Faulkner in college and read The Bear, for instance, at St. John's College, Annapolis, and I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing.
Mhm.
It is a it is an evocation of a world as well as a telling of a story. And again, my grandmother's in the back of my head. And I'm thinking, I know what that's like. I've heard that before. And then I read McCarthy. And so there's other folks too. Marilyn Robinson, I just love her work because you know
Mm.
what? She understands that there's a kind of religious imagination that infuses the language. And I have to
Mhm.
say that the parallel track for me growing up was being raised a Catholic. And it was not progressive or conservative. We were Slovak Americans and we were going to church.
Mhm.
I found that the church was a really good place for me to find a kind of, well, I'll say a parallel imagination. Dante, um, Saint Augustine. It's incredible the amount of great writers who are in this tradition. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that types of storytelling just kept adding up for me
Yeah.
before I actually sat down and wanted to think about it. And then I get to college and I read the classics and I get to read Homer in Greek. And so once again, it just kept moving along. You mentioned Dante before, and I mentioned the Purgatorio, but the cool thing about the Purgatorio, I mean, the Inferno is hard stuff and really brilliant. But the Purgatorio is, if you're between Paradiso and hell, they know they're going to get to the good place, right? But it's
Mhm.
going to take some time. Go back and read the Purgatorio. It's like a couple of friends walking along, talking about poetry and philosophy. That's
Mhm.
what it's all about. And I just think, wow, I was rereading this during COVID and I thought, there's no better poem that understands this, this thing that matters right now. So that's the kind of thing I would.
You know, so I want to talk about the spirituality in your work in a moment, but the question before that is, you mentioned this idea about kind of like how dense Dante is with philosophy and ideas, right? But there's something about your work which, although Shakespeare comes up and some Greek philosophy comes up a little bit in this book, there's something about it that is actually, I feel like, it doesn't have ideas in the language in the sense that like the words just mean exactly what they mean. There's a way that it feels to me that the words are just representing themselves and you're trying to almost like speak as if no one has spoken English before, and speak as if no one has thought in this language before. And it's like, here are the words and here are the ideas, like almost new and pure and as if said for the first time. And it was that I really liked about it. So even then, when you do talk about, some ideas in Shakespeare and Greek philosophy, just a little bit in the book,
Right.
it also feels pure, like as if this is the first time a human being is like encountering these. And it just has this kind of new elemental thing. Like you just pulled it new out of, out of wherever. What do you think about that? Is my read making sense to you?
It does make sense. I mean, I really appreciate that. That's such
Yeah.
a cool read, and I think it could be with my own struggle with the ideas, and as a writer, not a philosopher, I get to go back and think about that. Um, I mean, for lack of a better word, the Zen mind, beginner's mind. I
Yeah.
remember, after high school and getting to St. John's College and reading, the first thing we read was the Euthyphro by Plato, and I just
Mhm.
remember being in seminar thinking, holy crap, I get to read this. And everyone is
Yeah.
so smart. And we're just talking about this play in which Socrates is getting Euthyphro to talk about virtue. And it's
Yeah.
like, and it's so damn cool. And then the next one is the Iliad, and then the Odyssey. And like, forget it. For the next 4 years, you're like, I'm in this. But so my point is that it was not without a struggle for me intellectually, but I think as a writer, I love that initial turning over of the word.
Mm.
And the other thing is, having listened to Slovak my whole life, uh, I think that I love being around languages and thinking about languages, and so I've studied a few, and it's that struggle with finding the right word, and when you do find it, how interesting it is, and how it's like worlds opening up, as though somehow you did sort of crack a stone and you found that word for,
Ah,
for ants in Spanish, hormigas, what a
mhm.
great word, Or I was telling you, in classical Greek, the word for Charybdis vomiting up the ocean that Odysseus, the sailing passes, is anamormureska. And it's like it literally is vomiting, or the sailors wailing is goantes. It's just like that stuff. That was quite literally taking the top of my head off. And so
Mm.
if you're saying that you feel that kind of uh, visceral language for the first time, then I guess it's in there in ways that I hadn't really thought about. I'm not conscious of it, but I sure am conscious of those moments where it was a delightful struggle for me.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really is a compliment. It's like it means there's an absence not of ideas, but rather received ideas, and
Mm.
there's an absence of cliche. And
Oh,
there's sort of like I'm going to wrestle this one on one, and I'm not going to let somebody else wrestle it for me, and then sort of like let their ideas represent it. I'm going to wrestle this myself, and I'm going to give you what I find.
Can
You
can
know,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. Can I say too? I think it's a function of my writing process.
yeah,
I just have to get it right, and I write and rewrite, really listening to the sound of, in this case, the clause, but
mm,
generally, the sentence. And I think I'm just a failed musician. I really just wish I could be a piano player for the
yeah,
rest of my life, but that'll never happen. Um, and so I to me, language is the only good instrument the only instrument I've really gotten proficient at,
yeah.
and so that's also what I'm trying to shape, if you will, on
Yeah.
the page. Yeah. So,
I heard you make a comment in a different interview about the substance in nature, that nature has substance. I'm pretty sure I'm interpreting what you said the right way, but here's how I interpret it. Now you tell me if I got this right, but there's a way that I think that in the world today, the nature can feel like it is nothing. Like if you drive out into the middle of the wilderness and somebody says, "Where are you?" and you look around and all there is trees and mountains, you say, "Oh, there's nothing here." Right?
mhm,
Like I'm in the middle of nowhere.
right.
And meanwhile, like anything that has a screen, or if you're in a house, you're in some controlled, manufactured human environment, then you're somewhere, right?
Right.
And I just think that what I took your comment to mean, and the reason I bring it up is because I feel like this is a lot of like what's going on in your book when you write about nature, is that there is a there, and there is a connection directly with nature, and there's a way that your books are trying to kind of forge that and resurrect it and bring it back, that like there is a relationship that you can have with nature and the raw world that is substantive. Does this feel like a thought that you've had? Is this where you were headed with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Growing up again in Pennsylvania, we were in what we called the woods all
Yeah,
the time,
yeah, yeah,
and it looking back on it, wasn't always easy, but it sure was a cool place, and we fished,
yeah.
and my father and my older brothers were hunters, but by the time my younger brother and I were old enough to, my father's like, I've had enough of that. Let's just go fish. So we
Mm,
fished a lot. But I think this as a coming at it from the other side through a life of literature. The what's always what I have felt is lacking in literature is nature as an actual character,
mhm,
protagonist in Greek, the first actor. And so in fiction that's supposed to be about the environment still remains this passive stage across which people march, wringing their hands about what's happening to the passive stage across which they're marching. And I
mhm.
think, what if we gave nature more agency? I think the world's going to be just fine. I think humans might be screwed, but the earth and nature itself in the whole cosmos is so much more powerful than we ever give it credit for. And
Mhm.
so, but more to the point, from literature, the perspective of that is that nature is substance, and I do believe that I'm not an animist, but I do believe that we short shrift nature with respect to its capacity to be an actor, a character, to have some agency. And I think, when I'm in my house in New Hampshire and or even just I'm laying awake at night, not sleeping or hanging out in the daytime, there's ways in which if you just listen at another level, there's things that are happening. There's a whole drama unfolding that getting in tune with does become an act of a kind of meditation. We're thinking about the possibility that nature is an actor, has actual substance. I mean, you're right. This, of course, it has substance. If you're out in the woods, you can hit a rock or grab a tree limb. But I think that I think the problem is humans do think in this vertical, and so it's kind of hubristic to think that we're at the top and everything else goes beneath us. But I've come more to realize, or to think about the idea that perhaps we do share a horizontal existential number line, if you will. And sharing that horizontal existential stretch is a lot more interesting to me as a storyteller than thinking about, I'm at the top and I'm going to look down in nature and write something about it from there. So, I mean, it comes with all kinds of problems, but we know that trees communicate with other trees. There's a book right on the shelf behind me, The Secret Life of Trees. And this is all science. This is it's not woohoo. The natural world is capable of substantial communication.
Yeah. So. You have a strong reading background in the classics and in the spiritual classics. I know that the Confessions of St. Augustine is a famous a book that you've read a lot and one of your favorite books. I know you've pored over the Old Testament. You wrote a book called The Long Retreat about kind of your own spiritual odyssey. I guess my question to you is, I feel like there's something spiritual at work here. I mean, again, returning to the chewing on the old hard questions. I mean, what is kind of more spiritual than that? And spirituality is like trying to find answers or philosophies around such hard eternal questions. I feel like your fiction is spiritual work. And I guess my question to you directly about that is, why fiction for your spiritual work? Is it just that this is what you have a gift for, as you said? Or is it that, like, I mean, for example, you could just write more books like The Long Retreat. You could write directly about spirituality. You care about these questions. You could directly address them in a kind of overtly spiritual work. But you're up to something else here, and you choose to quest by writing fictional stories. Why?
Listen, for poets are fain to lie, and I will tell you. And I will listen, for poets are fain to lie, and I am a liar for you 1,000 times. John Barron in Sonnet 43. I think because it goes, I'm going to go right back to my grandmother. She struggled with those questions. And okay, I could continue to write nonfiction. I think Barry Lopez, the late Barry Lopez, is one of the great spiritual writers of our time, and he wrote about nature. I could try that, but I find that and I have written some poetry, and I feel like the novel is where the authenticity of the voices that taught me is my best expression of those questions that those who came before me struggle with. And I mean, if you told me 25 years ago I'd have 5 novels, I'd say you're smoking way too much weed. So, but it's a road I started down, and once I did, it's satisfying in the composition. It's satisfying as a craft. I love sentences and languages and seeing what is precisely the right word. But I cannot not hear those questions of the elders asking themselves and asking them in front of me, like, what's this all about? And so I think that's what fiction lets me do.
I find for myself that, there's this phrase, somebody can come to terms with something, right? And this phrase generally means, they have understood it, digested it. It doesn't pain them as much anymore because they've come to terms with some failure or some hardship or some pain in their life. And in many ways, for me, that is the spiritual aspect of writing. It is that, if you have a felicity with language, if you have a gift for it, if you love language, then you can sometimes, on a good day, put into words what your pain is. And that is a way of mastering it. That effectively lessens the pain because you think, there it is. Now I see it. There's this kind of ghost that's haunting me and giving me pain. And now I've put it before my eyes. I've put it into words. I have come to terms with it. And that it feels like a spiritual act.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. I don't know. I mean, I'm not in pain. I wish, I just don't, I like that. I guess I don't know how to answer that, honestly.
I'm just sharing. Because I feel very spiritual when I feel very meditative. I feel better after I write. I mean, when people talk about the effects of meditation on their life, I feel like I don't really need to do that because I write every day, and that's how the system is cleared out. That's how the spirit passes through.
I have been thinking about the fact that writing for me is a function of three things. It's memory, it's touch, and it's breath. That might sound very obvious, but to me it's that trio is in constant relationship. So I'm constantly thinking. I'm always having to just touch the thing that is I'm writing about. And then breath too is, again, getting that expression correct. And I think that I get that type of three-dimensional understanding of things when I do write. Can I, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to stand up and grab it.
Yeah, do it.
This is the ICC-14 box of American cyanamide dynamite that figures prominently in Mule Boy.
Yeah.
And it was in my grandfather's barn. My brother to me. It's just the side of the box. It's in the barn, and the house was sold, and the barn was knocked down because it was, couldn't stand up anymore. And he said that to me, not knowing I was writing about this. And so, touching this, I am touching my grandfather's. He died before I was born, but the blood, the oils, the dust, the dirt that he took down into the mines every single day is in that wood.
Yeah.
And there I am. That's the story. And so I never got to meet him, but I knew him my whole life, and I can touch that. So I think it's not so much that's my meditation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that. The touch and the breath and the memory. It's like your writing is just so tactile, and it has this rhythm to it, like natural speech. And it does feel like that you are like honoring, your ancestors and these stories that have been passed down through an oral tradition. One of the things that I love most that's in the book, and the way I've heard you talk about the book, is just the pride that your family had at working in the coal mines. And like, it was hard work and it was dangerous work. But here's the thing. They were able to make money doing it and to provide for people. And there's this wonderful line in the book that, like, somebody talking about why they want to come to America and work in the coal mines in America, because, God it's something along the lines of like, God has blessed you if you have the opportunity to work. Like, it is a blessing to be able to work. And they were good at it. They knew what they were doing. And any man takes such pride in just saying like, hey, I know how to do this hard thing. And so and that also kind of informs when that gets taken away from people, how hard it is.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with those passages. That's a real sort of a doubleness and tension in the novel. And it certainly was that way in my family too. And I heard my mother and my father talk about this. My mother's father was a master carpenter. He built many houses on the street where we lived in Pennsylvania in the 20s, post World War I, and before he went down into the mines. Even when he did go down into the mines, but the Depression made him become a miner. And you don't just become a miner. He probably was a buddy for someone for a while, but he quickly became a miner just because of his capacity. And my father's father, even as a young man in his 30s, he was able to become a miner. And all of these jobs in America pre-World War II were really dangerous,
Yeah.
You and I are in Massachusetts. I just saw a news report on television at the doctor's office the other day about two men who died in a fishing boat off of Cape Ann, just flipped over, and one man is lost forever. The other guy was recovered, and that's fishing. That's fishing in the year 2026.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you this too. When my father and his brothers came back from World War II, their middle brother was going to go to Bucknell to study engineering. My father was going to go take the State Police Academy exam, and my Uncle John, the oldest, was going to go back down into the mines to work because they were still going then in the 40s. And my grandmother pulls my dad aside one day and she said, "Tommy, give your seat at the academy to John and you go to college because I don't want another one of my boys to die in the mines." So he did. And he went and got a college degree. And all three of them were raised from single mother, certain poverty, to white collar workers in America.
Wow.
And so there was the mines took hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of men's lives, and that's the truth. So the pride is there, but also the reality that this kind of work was quite dangerous. And my mother's father died of black lung. He basically suffocated trying to breathe. So,
wow,
yeah.
I got a few more questions for you before we wrap. Just one is about men. And men and writing and fiction. Now, I doubt it would be a surprise to you to hear that, like, when I go around to writing conferences and I go and speak about fiction writing, there are very few people who are, I would say, mid-career, like say somebody in their prime earning years, among men who are fiction writers, especially literary fiction. And then I would just say generally, I've been to conferences where women outnumber men at least 4-1. And sometimes that number feels like 9-1. There's a lot of kind of reasons for this about how women read more. There's been like a lot of, progress in the workplace with women getting lots and lots more jobs. I mean, I think like in a marketplace where women are the main consumers, it feels totally appropriate that women would hold most of the jobs in publishing. But I guess for me, and clearly for you, literature is a calling. It's irresistible. I believe it's so important. I don't believe that because there's some argument for it, although I could make an argument. I believe that just because that's how I'm made, and I'll never stop loving it, and I'll never stop doing it. But I just wanted to hear from you. I mean, not only are you a man who's been writing for a long time, and writing literary fiction, but you're writing about masculine things, and you're writing in a masculine way. I mean, those are my words, not yours. But and I'm very grateful because there's not as much of that, and I'm kind of curious. What are your thoughts on all of that? Why is that? Where are we today as men who are writers and readers?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a big question. I just had a reader at my book reading at Harvard Bookstore who was talking about this exact same thing. Speaking for myself, I will say that I grew up largely around women. My grandmother's powerful women. My mother, herself a white collar worker, the child of an immigrant who goes to college, the first daughter, and her father says, yes, you can go to college. You got a full ride to what's now Misericordia University in Pennsylvania. And her brother derided her for it. He said, "What are you going to college for? You're just going to get pregnant." And her father said, "You leave her alone. she's going because she's smart. And you know, her life was great. The men in my family were equally just great men. I mean, I don't know. My father never put an obstacle in my way, and they were of the so-called greatest generation. They had their struggles. They were not always. It was not all sweetness and light. That's for sure. So let me just say this. I think that the one thing that I think about a lot so much is it's work, and it might end up being filtered through a lens of masculinity, but it's about work. And my mother and my father, my grandmothers and my grandfathers shared this. You work because it's what we do. It's what, you know, my father would not quote Virgil, but in the Georgics, Virgil calls it labor improbus, which is just damn hard work. And that's a writer. So I think this need to work is certainly an American thing. That, you know, Americans but it's also a worldwide thing. When I read Cormac McCarthy, I love the scenes about work. He gets it, you know, and it's a non-interiority point of view. McCarthy's characters this is not a Henry James novel. These guys are not inside their heads. They're out in the world doing things. And that's always appealed to me. But I think being out in the world doing things was the sort of the great sign of someone who's good and right and faithful, you know, in the way I was brought up. So I was allowed to go study philosophy. Well, I don't know. When I went from philosophy to work in a boatyard, my father never said, "What are you doing that for? Why don't you go to Wall Street?" And when I started writing, I think, you know, the questions were, well, I should say there were no questions. And so that when my father passed away before I had written my first book, but my mother, to whom the book is dedicated because she was Irene, which means peace, she said, Andrew, I think I'm finally trying to I think I finally understand what you're trying to do. To me, that was the greatest thing she could ever say.
And did she say what it was? What did she think you're trying to do?
The writing. Be a writer.
Oh, just be a writer. Yeah.
Work. It's this work on language, work on storytelling. And what I wasn't able to say, I just said, "Thanks, Mom." I work hard at it. But what I could have said more. Now I realize in retrospect what we've been talking about for this past hour is that it's the work I listened to your mother do, and my grandmother was in the woods all the time. Like, woman, when she wasn't working, she was asleep. And so that's what I think that's what I would say. So if we think about masculinity, for me, it's about men and women doing work that is meaningful. It has both spiritual as well as physical meaning. And I feel like, you know, if you make something out of wood, if you make a piece of furniture, I'm attracted to the efficiency as well as the beautiful formal quality of something that's really made well. And so that's the way I approach the language is I'm not interested in what's flowery. I didn't come from those kind of people. I'm interested in something that works and is also beautiful. And I think that I strive for the beautiful because I saw a lot of unbeautiful things growing up. The way in which there was just a meanness to some folks. If you wanted to use your mind and think about art and be creative. And I just thought, well, what's the only way I can push back against the meanness is to be, I don't know, to push back with what's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the question of, I should say the question about masculinity approaches an either or. And I always reject the either or. To me, the both and is where the imagination becomes the most powerful.
And just a quick follow-up before we wrap, the idea about men, like not that many men writing and doing this wonderful work, as you described, this kind of like humble, kind of every day waking up and doing this meaningful work with language. I totally get it. But what about the idea that like not as many men seem to be doing that? Not as many men are reading, especially fiction. What's your thought on that? Like why is that?
I wish I knew. I just don't know. I think, I think about education. I wish I wish it was okay for everybody to read Plato. It doesn't. My father said, he suggested I go study philosophy, and when he was told by the men in his department where he worked, what's he going to do? Why doesn't he go become an accountant? He said he's not going to college to get a job. He's going to college to educate himself. For my father and my mother too, education was a moral education, a moral formation, as well as something that was, that could lead to, if you want to get a job doing something specific, then you go to graduate school where you begin to specialize, the professional. So for them, though, that 4 years of college this is where you shape the mind. Yeah. And maybe that's just outdated. Maybe that's, I'm a dinosaur.
No, we're bringing it back. We're bringing it back. It starts right here.
Yeah, well, good. I mean, I would like to see that. And I think, I'm going to go back to Marilyn Robinson for a second. Her novel Gilead is such a beautiful account of a man struggling with this particular kind of life in 1953 Iowa, and thinking, I don't have much time left. Yeah. It was certainly time well spent for John Ames, but is it time well spent for everyone? Am I the last? As Jason Isbell would say, am I the last of my kind?
I am going to fight back against us being the last of our kind for the rest of my life, Andrew. I promise you that. All right, Andrew, we have to wrap here. The book is called Mule Boy by Andrew Krivak. There's one last question I ask everybody on the show, and it's this, Andrew. Imagine that there is an ideal reader for Mule Boy, and this is somebody who is just absorbing the work on every level that you'd like it to be absorbed, picking up everything you're putting down, receiving the work the way you dreamed it would be received in your wildest dreams. Now imagine this person finishes Mule Boy, they close it, they put it on their lap, and they look out the window. Tell us in a phrase or even a single word, how does this reader feel?
I'm going to say, again, the both and. I'm going to say in this space where one is both grounded and transcendent at the same time. I know what that's like, and it's rare. But if that were to happen to someone, if they look out the window and they see the natural world and they think, I have a greater affinity for that, and then at the same time feel that capacity for language to sort of, raise them up, like if they would listen to a symphony or something, or so grounded somehow in this place of being both grounded and transcended at the same time. That's what that's what I would imagine.
It just goes back to that, it's tactile, but it's spiritual. It puts you in direct connection with something, and yet it lifts you up into these higher thoughts. I love it. That's so perfectly said. Andrew, this has been wonderful. Congratulations on the book. It's been getting great reviews, and I hope it keeps going. This is awesome.
Yeah, appreciate it. I hope so too.
All right.
Okay, Mark.
All right, folks, thank you for coming. Again, happy birthday to A Mighty Blaze, and we'll see you all next week on The Thoughtful Bro. Thanks, Andrew.